Hello and welcome to another episode of New Narratives Political Agenda with me, PJ Thum, and today we welcome Charles Yeo, lawyer and chairman of the Reform Party. As always, if you enjoy the interview you're about to hear, please do check out New Narrative at newnarrative.com. You can learn more about us at newnarrative.com/hello, and if you'd like to join as a member, newnarrative.com/join, or if you'd like to donate to support our movement, newnarrative.com/donate.
Asian, stay where you are. We've come way too far. Where you think that you're gonna go? This is utopia. Please stay where you are. We've come way too far.
So I am wearing a green, yellow and grey batik shirt, sitting in front of a map of Southeast Asia with two other men around a black table, and my pronouns are he and him. Joining us today, as always, my co-host, Editor-in-Chief of Wake Up Singapore, Sean Francis Han. Hello, Sean. How are you?
Hey, good to be here. I'm quite excited. We've got the man, the myth, the legend, Charles Yeo himself. I'm really excited to get into this. Right, it's one of those episodes where we're doing something different. Right, we're talking to somebody in a political party. Right, so that's kind of a change of pace, and I'm quite excited to get into this. But before we do, I'm wearing a white striped shirt, green pants. And my pronouns are he, him. Charles, take it away.
Hello guys, my name is Charles Yeo. I am wearing a white shirt with a pair of jeans and my pronouns are he and him. So we shall now begin the interview. yes. So I just want to say it's a big honor.
Yeah.
Okay, Charles, so if there's anyone in Singapore who has not heard of you, why don't you start by introducing yourself to our audience, who you are and what you do?
My name is, I think I've introduced my name. So I am a lawyer by profession. I am 30 years old. I am currently an equity partner at the law firm of Whitefield Law Corporation. So that is the boring part. I am also a political activist, but I would not describe myself as a politician. In the course of the interview later, I will try to describe or explain the distinction, and I also other than that, I'm really just average Joe on the street.
All right. So can you tell us a bit about why you got into politics in the first place? What was the spark? What was the impetus that led you here?
The impetus was that the society of Singapore, as I see it, is not a society that is free and fair in nature. It began when I was young, and I started to when I read various works. The first, ironically, one of which was of course Lee Kuan Yew's memoirs. Now, in Lee Kuan Yew's memoirs, which I read, really got me thinking because of a lot of stuff that was written in the memoirs, and I read it at about 9 years old. But of course, that was it was given to me by my aunt, and my aunt also gave me a copy of Make It Right for Singapore, which is a book written by my party's founder. At that point of time, I think because of the dissonance in the ideas portrayed in the two books, which I read at around the same time, it got me thinking, and it started to make me more interested in the historical events that occurred in Singapore and how Singapore has modified the establishment in Singapore has come up with a narrative to suit its own agenda, and also how it is not accurate at all, which of course PJ is well known for having expounded on, and I don't want to ban men nong fu in front, a Chinese phrase in front of he's really. I want to urge all of you guys to go and watch PJ's content, where he goes in and really delves into the historiography and all that.
Mm-hmm. So that's your road into politics, but how did you get into the Reform Party? Or running as a candidate more broadly, right? Because I think a lot of people, they go through this process where they get, they have this political awakening, and there's so many options to choose, right? You could join a cause, you could join an NGO, you could be kind of like raising awareness on social media, but you took that step to go into a political party and run as a candidate. So why was that the move there? What led you there?
What led me there was that in Singapore, when in the UK, I did well in Islamic law, and of course my point of reference was a professor called Shaheen Sada Ali, that was one of a minister, the first woman minister in Pakistan. So she actually wrote at that point in time, I actually only applied to 3 law firms in Singapore. Actually, to be honest, I think we can say it is only, I applied to Peter Low and to Ravi. Now, the common similarity between the 2 law firms is, of course, they practice public interest litigation. At that point in time, since that happened, the law firm of Eugene Turasingham has become a third player in the scene, and I mean in the sense that it has taken up a lot of all these con and edit cases. But I only did these 2. I was only interested in these 2 firms lah. So fast forwarding, the link to your question is that, of course, as people know, Ravi in 2015, I volunteered with the Reform Party and attended as its supporter because Ravi was my PTC mentor. And I of course, this is nothing to do with the PTC, but I actually consider the concept of mentorship is very important, and I agree largely with a lot of what Ravi has on a human level. That is where I would say that it was him who introduced me in a way to the Reform Party, and I think viewers will be able to simply the link between Ravi and the Reform Party is that Ravi stood as a candidate for the Reform Party in 2015. Yeah, so I was summary is I really volunteered the Reform Party from 2015. Ravi introduced me to the Reform Party. I found that I agree with a lot of their ideas, and I just worked my way up like anyone else in any other organization. Yeah.
Can I just clarify PTC?
PTC refers to the practice training contract, which is a requirement imposed by the legal framework in Singapore for anyone to qualify as a lawyer.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And then when you said you applied to 3 firms and 2 of them were Peter Low and Ravi, but you ended up working with a different firm, the firm you are with today?
That is a different track altogether, because to clarify, I applied. I was with Ravi's. Ravi was at that moment in time with the law firm LF Violet Netto, which he was for a very long time. After in Singapore, I left the law firm of Violet Netto because Violet is pretty old and she's going to retire lah. So for reference, Violet is already 76 years old lah. So I do not really think it is very. So at that point in time, that is where I left the law firm after serving out about 3 years as a self ready in that law firm for 3 years. And after that, because under the Singapore the rules in general, in order to from 3 years onwards, you can go and either be a partner or set up your own firm. And bearing in mind that Violet was Violet's age and all that, I do not really think it is. I don't really want to burden her with any. But I continue to be on very good terms with her lah.
Yeah. Okay. So you then worked with Ravi at Violet Netto's, was it? And then you helped him out. You volunteered. You attended the Reform Party rallies and events in 2015 when he stood.
Yeah.
And then at what point did you formally decide you want to join the party?
I decided I would want to join the party only in 2018. Right. Late 2018. But ideologically, I was always, in fact, way before 2015. In fact, I would like to draw the distinction between, of course, turning up at the party's rallies does not automatically make you a member. But even in 2011, I did turn up at some Reform Party rallies, and I did, of course, post on social media extensively to support the Reform Party, and also many other and also of course at that time the SDP lah. I have always identified as a supporter of the SDP, and to put forward my ideas on many issues, which chief of which at the time of 2011 was of course the issue of immigration. Yeah.
So what was it about the Reform Party that drew you in? Because it sounds like you're quite well acquainted with the political scene here.
Yeah.
You went and looked at the different parties, you went to the different rallies, but what is it about the Reform Party that stood out to you?
The major thing that stood out for me about the Reform Party is that the Reform Party was founded by Mr. J.B. Jeyaretnam, who is largely agreed to be the father of modern opposition in Singapore. Other than him, to summarize the political history of Singapore, there was the Barisan that existed for a period of time, and for about 20 years after that, there was no opposition in parliament whatsoever until JB and Chiam See Tong, which was until these two persons. So largely speaking, these two, there is a consensus that, you know, this is really a statement of fact lah, that prior to these two persons, there was opposition, but there was no opposition parliamentary representation before these two persons. So then the next topic that would arise is really, do I agree more with the ideology and methods of Chiam Senior or Jeyaretnam? And generally, I do agree more with Jeyaretnam's tactics and Jeyaretnam's personal beliefs and ideology, because I also did read the speeches of Chiam in detail. I do not really agree with many of them. And of course, I do respect Chiam in a certain way, but the main reason why I joined the Reform Party is because I really believe that we need to continue Jeyaretnam's struggle, which he carried on until the day he died.
So you're bringing up sort of the historicity of the party as being a big motivating factor for you joining the Reform Party. But I mean, beyond that though, what are the core values, the core ideas of the Reform Party that speak to you in a way that no other party's manifestos or core values speak to you, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure every party has kind of its own history. They have their own strengths, their own weaknesses. They have charismatic and capable people there. But what is that X factor, in terms of core values, in terms of vision that RP has that made you choose them?
The core values of I will try to be to the point to summarize. First of all, the core value of the RP is that they emphasize on democratic accountability and generally the emphasis on transparency. Now the next thing is that the unique thing about the RP is that amongst all the other political parties in Singapore, there isn't a cadre system in the RP. The cadre system has been criticized as the Pope elects the cardinals and the cardinals elects the Pope. So what does this mean? It basically means that, for the benefit of the audience, I think later on PJ may be much better at explaining it than I am. But the idea is that, a person at the top chooses people whom he likes or who are inclined to support him, and then they would support in turn, so it becomes a circular, self-ratifying, self-sustaining system, which is anathema to democracy. And I saw that in the RP's constitution, the founder had thought about this before he died, and he knew that, this is one of the issues that must be addressed. The founder also established that in the party there must be a democratic culture, and all members must be able to speak out and even disagree with the SG. And the SG is not a
Secretary General
is not a dictator in the party, and he would also not be able to, he would have to draw an important distinction between himself and the party. And generally there were safeguards that were implemented prior to the founder's death.
Oh, this is really interesting to me because, of course, in terms of the wider conception of the Reform Party in Singapore, there is a sense that it is very much Kenneth Jeyaretnam's party, right?
Yeah.
And that is very different from what you're describing, which is a sort of internal culture of democracy and structures which try to preserve internal party democracy. So why do you think there is this disconnect between the perception of the party as as a Kenneth Jeyaretnam vehicle, akin to many other parties which are also seen as a sort of one-man show, and how do you, as the newly elected chairman, you've been chairman for we're recording on 31st October, so what, 2 months now, thereabouts? How do you
about
plan?
3, yeah.
About 3.
So
yeah, how do you plan to change this?
I think first of all I would like to respectfully disagree, perhaps a bit partially, but at the same time what I'm trying to say is that first of all, I think there is a culture of personality politics in Singapore. Definitely, it is agreed that all the major political parties for the longest time ever in Singapore's nascent, and of course, many commentators have put forward the thesis that this was actually created first in time by the PAP, because the PAP was run by the cult of Lee, and since then the other political parties that grew out in the Singaporean framework, I do agree that with you, Mr. PJ, that there is a issue of the personality politics or the cult of personality.
I think that's true everywhere. I mean, to be fair, it's not just a Singapore thing. You look at the developed countries around the world, or even non-democracies, personality politics is something consistent with human society rather than any country or any system.
But I personally do not really think that this is an issue that is primarily unique to the Reform Party, that it is, because as much as the Reform Party could be said to be associated with Kenneth, could we also say that the SDP is associated with Dr. Chi and Dr. Chi's personal writings and theories? Can we also say that for the longest time ever after Jeyaretnam, that the Workers' Party was associated with David Marshall at some time, Jeyaretnam at some time, and more recently it was controlled? I mean, if you look at the last 25 years...
Okay, I mean, that's a fair point. And of course, the PAP is still gripped by the spectre of Lee Kuan Yew and unable to break through.
But your party is one that's trying to do something different, right?
Yeah.
You're trying to break out of this one-man show, one guy rules everything. So how do you kind of square that, right?
Yeah. For me, the first answer would be that actually the public perception is wrong, because Kenneth is actually very democratic and he calls for all views, and he is to overall, he does not really impose any of his ideas, and also he will call for regular party conferences whereby all people, all members of the party have a say-so in, and we are able to disagree with him. And generally, he does not have an assertive personality, which is likely to make one inclined towards a dictatorial way of doing things. In the first place, I would say that the benevolence, or rather, the positive part about Kenneth's role in the party is really that he has to be, as the son of JB, he has to continue to in a way, for better or for worse, even if we do not use the imperative word he has, he would be associated with the father's legacy. He would also be considered a trustee of the legacy in a certain way. He would also be the one that is largely empowered to interpret the teachings of the views of the father, in terms of what the father said and all that. But at the end of the day, of course, I'm not saying that whatever he says is accurate, but do we give him a presumption that he is, given the fact that he was really conversant with the political motivations, the ideas, the ideals that the father wrote when he was alive, then should we not at the end of the day, I think just evaluate whatever he says on the merits, and really that will be about it. On the merits, we evaluate whatever he says, and we want to move away from a framework that there is personality politics. That's where I agree with
Okay, so have there been incidents within the CEC where actually a majority of the CEC disagreed with Kenneth and outvoted him on something?
There actually, okay, the answer is yes, but I will not go into further
Yeah, of course.
detail.
No,
but the answer is really yes, there have been. And I think that, to me, that really illustrates why I did not make a wrong decision to join the Reform Party. And I think I would like to conclude this part of the discussion to say that for me, the Reform Party is the nearest to a democratic structure in Singapore. Yeah.
And just to clarify, like how exactly is it structured? Is it sort of like branches elect representatives to a central congress, which then elects the CEC, or is the CEC elected directly by all members? Can you just give us
CEC, the latter.
Right.
So the CEC is elected by all the members, and the CEC will make the final decision, and there will be a regular party conference that will be held to elect all the members of the CEC.
And who can join as a member? Anyone can join?
Anyone in Singapore, as long as he is a Singaporean.
Yeah, of course.
And
that's the law.
and he's not a undischarged bankrupt.
Yeah.
and he is also, of course, that is all, full stop. And that's really literally the only two requirements. And he must not be below 21 years. He must not be below 21 years old, which are all really requirements.
Yeah, I mean, the
it's
standard,
legal
basic,
requirements,
mindset.
yeah.
I mean, okay, but let's get into sort of GE 2020, right?
Yeah.
So I just kind of want to get into your thoughts and reflections on that. I'm sure you've been asked to death about the GE 2020 situation, right? But I think one burning question that I had, right, and especially because you're like a thinker, you engage with theory, right? I want to kind of take an interesting sort of meta approach to this. You were, I think, at the forefront, or at least very emblematic, of how G 2020 was very, very different from previous elections, right? So we all know the debacle where, party members didn't show up, the whole Mandarin saga. So that was memified and that was in the viral sphere. But what was very interesting, though, is that you garnered a lot of support for that fighting spirit, for that never give up attitude, right? A lot of young people began to sort of rally behind you. They started to kind of tune in, listen to you, get you on Telegram group chats, have these discussions, right? And even Ho Ching made a comment about it.
Yeah.
So to me, this really marks how different this election was, because in the past, I dare say, this kind of thing, this not well polished, this kind of very personable politics, it would have been seen as like weak or bad. But now it's being taken as a real interpretation of that fighting spirit, that never give up, that never say die attitude, right? So I just want to kind of get your reflections on that, right? How, from the inside, right? How was this election really, really different for you?
Yeah. Okay. First of all, I would like to, I really agree with what you say, but I would like to really explain the circumstances that led to although I've explained it to death, the circumstances that led to the 2v5, for want of a better word, is that at that point in time, one of the members was, of course, the SG is under a stay-home notice, and number two, really for one of the other members was taken severely ill at that point in time, which is something that it's a medical emergency, we really cannot do anything about this. And the third member, Mr. Andy too, he was at that period of time, because there were like a lot of physical constraints and a lot of there's a lot of admin and things that need to be done, really. That's why I wanted to plead with all viewers to really understand that in Singapore, to fight an election, it's not just coming onto a video and talking, which I think I have no issue to do, and I think many people have no issue to do. But it relates to Mr. Sean's question, because we cannot have meaningful reflections unless we think about the full gamut of things that are required by a party to do in order to put up a meaningful fight. And one of them is donations plus physical man on the ground and labor, and to hang up the posters. And do you know that constantly during the election we got a lot of messages asking where are the posters and where are the banners? But do these commentators, of course, I wanted to reply to them tersely and to explain to them, do they know how long it takes to hang up one banner, or rather the effort? Have they even hung up a banner before in their life? And one question is that of course, again, we, to a certain extent, this illustrates the non-level playing field that we go facing. But the answer is that Andy was at the time hanging up the banners, and he came late, and by the time he came late, he was not allowed to enter the studio. And that leads to my personal reflections, because for me, I felt that I was not doing anything noble, but just living my personal ethos out. And people that know me personally, they will know, like, whether in gaming, in real life, I'm a very, very persistent character. I will not give up. And when we say not give up, I'm much more extreme than others. Like, for example, I think I'm the sort of person that I'm not. To me, I felt that I've turned up, I've committed to this. I have a responsibility to put across the message in Chinese, even if I am not conversant in Chinese, and even if whatever difficulties I may face, because that is the responsibility. It is like, you have to do it, or you better do it lah. If you cannot do it, then it shows you have failed, and you better do the best that you can before you give up. And I just humbly want to share that I think this is a very good. We want society to start to have this thinking, because if not, then it will be it will be a kind of defeatism, and we need to. The analogy I raised in a recent conversation with my friend is Steve Irwin. Why was Steve Irwin so respected by people until the day? Because until the day he died, he literally died for the cause of animal conservation and animal rights awareness. He spent his whole... If we are not able to even demonstrate these, then it shows that whatever we said, whatever we have done is for naught. There is no point in talking about all this.
So would you say that you are hopeful that this is emblematic, the support of young voters and Singaporeans coming out to say, you know what, I like this guy's gusto, it wasn't as prim and polished as I would have liked or as I'm used to, but it really shows that never say I die attitude. Do you think this is emblematic of sort of Singaporeans taking a new pair of lenses to politics? To not demand so much that, everything's nice and prim and proper, but that really that spirit and that the ideals are there and lived.
And a sort of authenticity.
Right? Yeah.
Because what we see from politicians, especially from PAP politicians, but also you see it from Workers' Party, extremely polished, very well prepared. All the rough edges shined off, right? And to one extent, that's great, professionalism. But to another extent, you're like, is that really who they are?
Yeah.
Who is the person I'm actually voting for here? I want to see some genuine emotion, and you are real, you're authentic.
Yeah. You really lay it all out there, right? So I want to kind of know, do you think that this is emblematic of Singaporeans taking a new approach to politics?
This is a very profound question that I think you guys have touched on, and the first answer I'll give is no. It may not be emblematic, because we need to understand that historically there have always been people that want the polished side. In terms of a normal distribution, there will be some, the spectrum of people. Some people will want polish, some people will want authenticity. There will be people in between, and I think the majority, even at the younger age, of persons in Singapore that want to emphasize on the finished product of polish is still higher than the persons that emphasizing authenticity per se. So
is it changing though? Is the ratio changing?
It is. But then it also, another concept that we can use to discuss all that is also the Overton window lah. Really in terms of emphasizing authenticity in and of itself, which is very high up on my personal view. But at the same time, I think I need to stand apart from my own ideas and look at objectively do people share them, and also see whether or not. But I will definitely come from the point of view that authenticity is very important, because you need to really be yourself, and you need to challenge this idea that you can only put your best foot forward. You can only be very shine and polished, and there is no room for failure, because all these associated ideas are part of the toxic state PAP. They are really, to me, they are very, very Singaporean ideas that exemplify the Singaporean condition. If you think about it, why is it that there's an emphasis on polish and all that? Because there is a afraid to fail kind of idea. And people feel that it goes back, and it goes to another topic that PJ has really shared on extensively with his academic credentials, which is about the delegitimization of alternative voices. So can you guys see the link, which is from requiring polish, which is based on the premise that only certain ideas can be shared, or rather the fear of failure or imperfection, which is in turn based on the idea that there is a spectrum of hierarchy in Singapore. There's a hierarchy in Singapore of whose voice can be heard and who is allowed to put forward his views. Yeah.
So I think that is something quite interestingly revolutionary in being authentic, being yourself, right? We kind of see AOC doing, similar things, engaging people on Instagram Live, kind of showing the not so polished aspects of their lives, right? But
I also think we should also be careful. When I think about it, you use the word spectrum, and it occurs to me that these are not opposing concepts, right? You can be polished and authentic, and likewise you can be unpolished and unauthentic, and we should be careful not to set them up in opposition to each other. But I think there is a certain, we do agree that there's a certain spectrum here where we do want to see and understand more of politicians' genuine, authentic identity and what they stand for, but at the same time we also want them to be very polished and professional at it. And maybe that's kind of unreasonable, because we're all just human beings. Do go on, Charles.
But yeah, so I want to kind of get into your sort of unorthodox or very unique way of engaging the public. So you do a lot of Instagram Live, you do Facebook posts, you do Instagram stories, you have a Telegram group, right, where people can ask you questions, right? So I kind of want to talk about that, right? You espouse a lot of philosophical and theoretical views there, right? And I think that's quite interesting, right? That shifts the direction of the conversation away from a conversation of pragmatics and then GDP, right? And towards the more deeper, more important theoretical underpinnings of the whole thing. So can you tell me some of the core ideas or the core theoretical insights that have guided you?
The first core idea is that I really want to reject this idea of, pragmatism in inverted commas, because to me, for the longest time ever, pragmatism is a byword. I put it in inverted commas or parentheses because it is a byword for what is expedient or what is good in the interest of the dictator or the people on top, the dictatorial bunch of people. Okay. The next thing is that when we talk about pragmatism, who defines what is pragmatic? And it goes back to the other issue of the legitimacy of voices. It becomes a self-sustaining kind of system, because whenever the people who are not able to speak up then their needs would be thereby classified as non-pragmatic. A third important point is also, really a philosophical issue, which is, even if it was not of the interest of a few is not pragmatic, can we consign them to oblivion? And what is the balance that we must strike? Because if you look at the society of Singapore, a lot of times people that are really very poor, they are left behind, and the state ideology in Singapore for the longest time was to portray them as lazy, feckless, or mentally incompetent. And in fact, the teachings of Lee Kuan Yew were very clearly of that view. And that is why he started to talk about eugenics. He believes that a person's ability generally to, and I'm linking this really to the topic of, I'm linking this to the topic that you ask, because I feel that we need to reject all these, and the first core value I have is that of I just listed the first lah. The rejection of the first would be the rejection of the people at the top, their right to impose ideology that is in their own favor under the guise of pragmatism. The second would be the replacement of that right with the emphasis of every man's inherent dignity and inherent worth. The key word is every man. Yeah. You see, that's why I return to early on, in the discussion, the preamble that we had before the recording. We look at RP's constitution, and the key word is that the key phrase. Every time I discuss all these with the members, I always talk about like the mission and vision of the party and all that. We have to emphasize the key word in the phrase in the constitution of the party that it is every man. It is not every advocate and solicitor. It's not every doctor. It's not every refugian. It's not every Hua Chongian. It's not every person with net worth above 35,000. You see, the key word is every man, and of course, man must be interpreted in that context to mean every human lah. It does not mean only every man lah. So, if we understand the keyword there, we can then go on to discuss. So, what do we need to do? If these are the two principles, right? Then the third thing must of course be we must flesh it out lah. At the end of the day, pluralism is important. The reason why pluralism is important is because when there is no pluralism, then the economic growth is illusory, because the economic growth goes into the pockets of the top, and trickle-down economics does not work. So, can we say that the ideology of pragmatism is used to justify the self-serving ideology in the same way that the divine right of kings or the religion in the past was used to legitimize the monarchy? So to me, I find that these are like, it's not rocket science. If you have half a brain, in fact, then you will see like how the state wants to shut down people that are able to point out all these through a few means. If their IQ is low or they came from a neighborhood school, then they will say that the person is dumb, does not know what to think, does not know how to conform. But if the person is from a good school and he still says this, then they will say, oh, the person is a troublemaker, or the person is fake news, then all these will come out, that which of course PJ has scanned up before many times. Then all sort of funny things. Then after that, POFMA and fake news fail. Then the next thing they will say is like against race. They will say, oh, very rich. This person is very idle. Then it could be in PJ's context, they will give him the ultimate label. They will say that he is foreign agent. He's acting under the interest and the instruction of Dr. M. Dr. M is passing him some money to do all this, which I have not garnered yet lah. But the idea is that, you see, guys, now I've tried to put this message in a funny way, but can we see that I answer Sean's question, because the core value is about delegitimizing. We want to remove this systemic delegitimization of voices. And
I think actually there's a certain poeticism of the party of JBJ articulating this idea, because of course these ideas were common currency in Singapore before the rise of JBJ, right? And when we talk about pragmatics, this is an ideology articulated very much by the PAP, by Lee Kuan Yew, since the 80s, when in the 60s and 70s, the PAP was oriented very much more as a socialist party, which was very much focused on maximizing the potential and the livelihoods of every Singaporean, and articulate a far more progressive stance towards society, and was very much a left-wing socialist party in that respect. But of course, with the failures of policy in the late 70s and with the broader global circumstances leading to economic difficulties, along with the rise of ideologies of neoliberalism, and in particular with the election of JPJ, the PAP shifted from one where we're going to fundamentally reform society to make it better for every Singaporean to let's preserve the current order with the PAP on top, right? So now for the party of JPJ to come back and articulate this idea of the importance of inherent human dignity of every individual, every person, every human being in Singapore, and let us work towards a society which treats everyone with dignity and maximizes their self-actualization, that is actually, the very ideology that the PAP abandoned in response to JPJ. So there's a sort of historical poeticism here, and I'm very, I'm very amused by it.
Yeah, I want to kind of get now into this recent movement that I've been quite heartened by, right? So we have Raisa. She mentions critical race theory. She mentions Angela Davis. You yourself often cite and espouse the ideas of theorists, right, like Mark Fisher. So I kind of want to know, what are some of the key theoretical or philosophical ideas that, you kind of have inspired you, that you kind of hold very dear, that have been crucial and fundamental to shaping the way that you think?
The way, first of all, I must be honest and I must say that the first concept that has really shaped the way I think is really about the importance of a Socratic education model.
Okay.
Yeah. The Socratic education model comes from a point of view that the teacher has much to learn as well, and that the learning process, the process of discussion or debate is what generates knowledge, and not purely a lateral, a top-down transfer from the knower to the one that does not know. And that stands in great opposition to the Confucianist model. The Confucianist model was one that was advocated by Lee Kuan Yew for the longest time, and if you look at the writings of Lee Kuan Yew, he at least endorses, he was very enamored by the Confucianist ethos generally, and he really believed that at the end of the day, he stands for the rejection of that kind of idea. He believes that, again, it goes back to the idea that there should be a pluralistic, that there is a plurality of voices, because inherent in the Socratic notion of education is that are two ideas. The first is that, through the process, that you have to question people gently to make them realize of their own accord rather than to browbeat them. Second is that you have to, it is possible that in the process of the questioning, the teacher may have much to learn as well.
Yeah.
So that is the first. The next idea.
I mean, is that where you kind of get that, is that sort of like the philosophical justification for the Instagram live sessions? Because, you're bringing up Socrates and Plato, and there's that very dialectical back and forth, discursive, rather than I'm gonna just, download this information into your brain, please believe me. Yeah, so that's okay. So what's the second idea then? That's quite interesting, because we're sort of seeing you come together.
Can I just
now.
also jump in and point out, Lee Kuan Yew's interpretation of Confucianism is not exactly Confucius' interpretation of Confucianism.
Yes.
Of course, Confucianism is a very robust and flexible philosophical system that has been reinterpreted throughout the decades, Mencius and so on. But I do feel that Confucianism gets a bad rep because of its association with authoritarianism, whereas Confucius articulated a certain set of responsibilities that ran both ways, right? Between the ruler and the ruled, between the husband and the wife, the parent and the child, that ran both ways. And authoritarianism focuses very much on a one-way relationship where you obey. So, just wanted to insert that in.
Yeah, so anyway, I agree with PJ 101%, but we shall not go further into that because then we will digress. And I have actually really discussed about that at length and about how there was a strange hybrid of Singapore that has Chinese, that takes only the Confucianist part of deference to authority, but at the same time it's hyper-capitalist, but doesn't have Western liberal values or the Chinese concept of the responsibility of the gene, you see. So then anyway, I did bring up some of these in my mimified speech. So anyway, we really will not go into that today because then, it will be, it's not really the focus of today's interview.
So what I do want to get into is beyond the Socratic educative model, right? What are the other ones? You were kind of inching toward the second one.
Yeah, the second one is that before I go on to the second one would be the concept of the historical inevitability, which is of course quite Marxist in nature but of course before they say that we are all Marxists and all that, the idea is that I really believe that history is made by factors and history can be understood as a science in the sense that history is produced by that history is a product of factors that really maybe not even in the, so think of it as like the not to bore the audience but the idea is that I do not really agree with the great man theory of history
Okay.
So I
Okay.
like we don't
as a professional historian.
of course
where is he going with this?
Yeah.
So I'm trying to say that at the end of the day, the PAP may trying to maybe creating its own demise ironically, because I wanted to illustrate I want to encourage people. The second thing I want to talk about is thinking critically and to identify paradoxes that are possible in Singapore. So one paradox I've tried to identify is this, which I don't want to come across as being very like acting big brain or that, but I identify a paradox in the PAP's system of governance, which is that does the PAP realize that ironically by bringing in a lot of foreigners, the foreigners they didn't buy into the PAP's culture of authoritarianism. So the PAP may be digging its own grave because as there are more and more foreigners that come into Singapore who are used to political pluralism and destabilizing the internal framework of just conforming and listening to what Papa knows and all that, then it would in time herald the demise of the PAP. So I want to create a culture where I do my part towards creating such a culture where people start to think about these kind of issues, like which is again, as I say, I'm not a foreigner hater and I'm not a xenophobe, but I just want to delve into all these topics and to discuss about how, for example, the foreigners are also victims of the PAP's machinations because at the end of the day, the idea is that they want to modify the structure is such in Singapore that the PAP thinks that it knows everything that is right, but history is the ultimate judge, and many things in Singapore which the PAP leadership has apologized. We have to see the apology for the excess foreigners and also the issue and the admission that Singapore had, for want of a better word, cock up the immigration policy, and which is now in year 2020 in the wake of the virus, is becoming a very big issue. Every day on the news we see people talking about the foreigners. So
I want to kind of jump in on that, right? Because you talk about sort of this teleological, historical inevitability of, I don't know, certain conditions, right? And that bringing in foreigners is kind of paradoxical on the PAP's part, right? But that, doesn't that mean that it's a good thing, right? Doesn't that mean that bringing in foreigners, should be something that we...
It links back to my first topic, which is that the link is that a lot of times that it really illustrates the problem with the Papa knows best ideology. If the PAP could commit such a logical fallacy, and it could, and we can see that there is a mismanagement of authoritarianism, then do we then conclude that authoritarianism is by itself wrong and bad? Because the authoritarian may be confined by imperfect knowledge as well. He's not only confined by self-interest.
Yeah.
He's also confined by a lack of perspective or a lack of like what I term noobness lah, because he only considers his own voice, and he was surrounded by a circle of straw men, and that straw man and the people that listen to him and stroke his ego compounded the problem of authoritarianism, which leads to the final thesis statement, the conclusion that authoritarianism is generally bad.
Yeah. Now, I buy that argument, but I want to put a little bit of pressure on your ideas about immigration and about foreigners, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, in one of the in one of the speeches, the memeified speeches of G2020, you talked about how, we don't want a Singapore in which foreigners come and get scholarships and then the poor are left to kind of wither and die. And that could be read as kind of anti-immigrant, kind of xenophobic, right?
Yeah.
So I want to put some pressure on that, because you just said something along the lines of, if foreigners come in, right, it diversifies the ideas. They are not as inclined to buy into the PP system. So it sounds like that's an amazing thing.
Yeah. No, it isn't an amazing thing, because before that would happen in the long run.
Yeah.
But in the short run, in the intermittent period of time, before that eventual, culture of PAP, erosion of PAP authoritarianism happens, there would be a lot. It goes back to, although we talk about the inherent dignity of man,
Yes.
there is a higher duty at the same time to people who are of the same country, and let me explain why. Okay,
yeah.
Because you see, it is about like tiers of duty. There is, in the first place, there is a duty, for example, like let's say to Party Liani, the justice system cannot treat her unfairly, accuse her of what she did not do. So think of it as duty tier like 1, but there's a higher order duty towards people of the same country, and that is based on the state's claim to authority and the state's claim to legitimacy.
So
Okay,
citizenship, you're saying citizenship.
Yes, citizenship. In that context, the state has a duty. So there's a duty towards its own people to ensure that they are not marginalized.
So this is a very similar argument, I think, to like critical spectators and conservatives who say, you know what, the migrant worker situation, well, that's fine, because our duty is first and foremost to ourselves. We have to prioritize the citizens. And then, the migrant workers, unfortunate, but, duty to us first, right? It's kind of a similar argumentative structure here.
At the end of the day, right, the structure is not. The difference is that, for example, if we talk about the migrant workers and the dorms, my argument would be that it falls below the duty tier 1. You see, go back to my analogy that to cram them up in that kind of unlivable condition is already below, is a breach of the baseline human duty. So we cannot just, but for example, giving scholarships to foreigners, that is way above the baseline duty. That is empowering them to get a good education and all that in Singapore, and causing a lot of locals to lose their education, the opportunity that they could have gotten as well. So it's a very, very radically different situation.
Okay.
So
I mean, okay, but let me put it to let's clarify so we're on the same page here.
yeah.
What's your fundamental gripe with immigration?
I have at least 4 or 5 fundamental gripes with immigration.
Okay, let's condense that. What are the few,
Firstly,
maybe 2 or 3 major?
I do not agree. The first thing is that society is that based on the international, the nation state construct, the nation has a paramount duty to its own people first and foremost, just like how the father has to his son.
Is that a Lim Tian quote?
And
okay, but all right, go on. Sorry.
and the the husband's duty is to his own wife. For example, if you were to, it's just like, it's common sense. It's just like, for example, a husband's duty is to maintain his own wife under the Women's Charter, and to maintain the husband's duty is to maintain his own wife. The parent's duty is to maintain his own children under the law. And the nation's duty is to maintain its own people. It's not to give opportunities to foreigners, and it's not to allow. And the next question then would be that the PAP likes to raise is that foreigners is usually it is in the interest of the people to bring in foreigners. That is how the PAP has tried to respond historically. Charles Yeo is drawing a false dichotomy there, because even in 2011, I talked about this topic, and the state was trying to shut me down, and of course they would respond and say that, if all foreigners left, then we will be out of job and all that. But I want to draw a very important distinction here. We are not calling for the expulsion of all foreigners. We are calling for a society where Singaporeans are not second-class citizens, and where there are concrete efforts made to remove the excess foreigners in Singapore who are not able or willing to assimilate. The key word must be able and willing to assimilate, and there must be a conscious effort of assimilation, and at the same
Isn't that a bit of a contradiction, though? If they were to assimilate, then they would be buying into the PAP system of brainwashing and love for Papa, love for...
Not necessarily, because not everything...
It's the difference, that brings that robust dynamism that challenges the way that things have always been done.
There are good points that you have raised, but sir, you see, not everything that is Singaporean is necessarily PAP.
Yeah.
Not every... A lot of the Singaporean ideas were founded and established first in time in terms of their, shall I say, like the bedrock of who generated them lah. Like, elitism, pragmatism, discriminating against people is quite established by the PAP. But we have to be very precise and say that, for example, Singaporean culture, Singaporean food, Singlish, was all this established by PAP? I don't think so. Because they were... So we do not necessarily... I mean, really, with due respect, that's where I would really disagree that we can have assimilation without them buying into the PAP model. And they need to be able to assimilate in terms of all these bare basics, like, for example, not demanding that people speak to them in Mandarin, not shouting at, behaving in a very oppressive manner, and generally abiding by the laws, and also taking away their approach, which is their mental framework, which is that they should be able to, their general tendency towards a lot of behavior that may not be acceptable in the Singaporean context.
Let me just put in.
Don't you think that this is also fundamentally then in opposition with your earlier statement about the fundamental human dignity of all citizens, because that isn't simply political or economic, it's also cultural. And people, because what you see around the world, regrettably, is that these arguments about assimilation then become arguments about conformity and the destruction, or maybe destruction is too harsh a word, but a demand that people who are not like you conform to a certain majoritarian idea of culture and identity, right? And this, as Chinese people who are recognized as Chinese, we have a certain privilege that we see ourselves and our culture as the majority, the default, the Singaporean one. But there are plenty of Singaporeans who are born here who already struggle with this idea that we are not sufficiently Singaporean because we do not behave or think or act in ways which are the majority culture, right? Singaporean, so if you're asking people to come here to assimilate, the danger is, and we see this all around the world, and in fact France right now, right, is grappling with these ideas. As we record this, again, 31st October, there have been 2 beheadings, and part of the problem is how much is someone expected to conform to a majoritarian culture that is not their own? Who gets to articulate what is Singaporean, what is the culture? Is it purely because we're in the majority and we have that privilege, right? And is that fair to ask people to fundamentally change the way they behave just because it's different from us? Shouldn't we respect their right to, if we agree on the dignity of all human individuals, that they should have the right to maintain and protect their culture. And then with this, we haven't even gotten into the whole argument about what is the nation state, right? And this is something else I've been talking about. The nation state is artificial, it is invented, it is imagined. The nation, there is no Singaporean nation in objective reality. It is collectively imagined. But the big problem in the world today is that the people imagine the nation in ways which discriminate and actively suppress minorities or deliberately exclude people from that nation. And the line you're walking here, is very dangerous, right? As to when you talk about a certain conception of the nation, and people wanting to be a part of it. So I think you also need to distinguish between the nation and the state. Someone who is part of a nation and someone who is a citizen and has certain civic rights versus someone who is somehow part of a broader identity, because we can't impose that identity on people.
I really want to. Okay, first of all, I think the issue you have raised can be addressed by explaining the hierarchy of rights. For avoidance of doubt, I do not agree with, for example, cramming the migrant workers in unlivable conditions.
Yeah, I think we all agree that that's
or
basic
like
human
access
rights.
to justice for Party Liani, like
Yeah,
convicting her. So I want to go back to that point earlier where I raised that there is a baseline hierarchy of rights, which I agree, which is why I really respect Jonathan, and I often repost a lot of his content, because I feel that this threshold of rights has in fact been breached. Human rights, keyword is human rights, like for example, has been breached in the case of Singapore due to hypercapitalism. I agree, and I feel that the society has done them a wrong. Okay, full stop. But then when we move on to the issue of who is required to assimilate and does the majority have a right to impose, my humble, my point of view to you, my submission is that yes, there is a right, because it's just like, for example, in the society that we live in, where 60% continue to vote for a very authoritarian party. Do we at the end of the day, if the party were to use the law to persecute you and me, we just have to we still have to the idea of respect, which you just pointed out, in itself suggests that we have to respect the right of the 60% who voted for I mean, to contextualize this further, I'm sure PJ, you did not vote for the PAB, right?
No.
I mean, yes.
I've never voted
You have
for
never
the
voted for PAB. Neither
Yeah.
have I. But at the end of the day, you see, if you talk about clearly to your answer head on, I mean, I would very rarely disagree with you, but the answer must be yes, the majority have a right to require the minority to conform within the certain bar. Because within that certain requirement, because they are the majority, and our only recourse against them would be perhaps, we can criticize them, but we cannot, by the virtue of the fact that the society is, that the current international order is composed of nation states, the nation has a right. I'm going to make two propositions. First proposition is nation has a right to require people who come in to conform to that set of norms. Second sentence would be that it is also in the best interest of both the immigrant and the general social fabric that the immigrant does in fact conform to that set of behavioral norms. That's what I'm trying to say.
Okay, but by your argument, right, you're saying do you see the line here? If a majority has the right to ask the minority to conform, in many crucial ways, you and I are the minority. That 60%.
Yes, and
with PAP can say, look, 60% backed us. Therefore, the other 40%, you must conform, right?
Or assimilate, right?
Yes, and assimilate. So we haven't even gone to the question of immigrants yet. It's about the rights of minority, and that is, I'm
few points I would like to make.
Okay.
You see, first of all,
address that first.
let's talk about numerically. As both of you have already said, 60-40.
in that sense, it's very different from the proportion of foreigners. Of course, foreigners is quite approaching almost 40%. But it goes back to the idea that what is the nation? I have no issue with, for example, PJ, what you said earlier. I do not disagree that we ideally we should move towards a society that humanity is really treating each other as universal brothers, and the point that you said earlier, that you talk about how it's an artificial construct. I'm not minded. I don't totally disagree, but I'm saying that for all intents and purposes, right, we are still currently living in a world which is demarcated by nation states, and therefore, do we have a legitimate right as citizens to demand that we are given priority for jobs, or that the government does not deviate from the international consensus, which is generally to only bring in foreigners in the case of a unique skill set, rather than being willing to do for less? Because Singapore is a society that has really allowed rampant immigration on the grounds of doing for less. So rather than unique skill set, like in many other countries, it's difficult to enter.
Yeah.
Only a person, it's difficult.
So I want to try and talk to you on a sort of theoretical level, maybe on a more philosophical level, right? Isn't it a little bit contradictory to the Socratic model, right? You've read the dialogues, right? There's the discussion, there's the difference of ideas between Plato and the sophists, right?
Yeah.
The kind of plurality which you just said was very important, right? You mentioned reading LKY, and LKY has this love of homogeneity, this love of everything coming together. I think what I'm trying to get at here is that isn't the principle of plurality and preserving the difference of the other, preserving the robust and different and often challenging and unique views of different people and different cultures more important? Doesn't that supersede any considerations?
On this point, I agree in the sense that we must still preserve their difference, but that is the point on
without
discourse.
recourse to an assimilation.
That is the point on discourse. But my point is on, firstly, before we even go to the assimilation point, my point is about economic advantages and economic opportunities.
Doesn't that bring us into pragmatics?
Exactly. Economic.
You're saying, the nation state is the current default, system that is being pragmatic rather than aspiring towards a higher ideal, right? And
I do not. So I really do not think. In fact, for me, this is not pragmatism, because this is, in fact, it relates to what is the right of the person who has come. Because, for example, everyone, you see, stands to each other in different capacities. For example, my duty and my rights vis-a-vis you, Mr. PJ, versus, like, for example, towards my girlfriend or towards my paralegal or different people. We all stand in different capacities. And my point is a very simple point, which is that when a person signs up to be a citizen, he has the right to expect. The very fact that the construct of citizen exists means that he can expect more. He also has to give more. And the distinction is there for a reason.
So I just want to put it this way. Many times these kind of relations, you're saying these kinds of duties that come with certain roles have been very misinformed. For example, less than 70, 80 years ago, a man could expect his wife to give him sex. A man had a duty to pay for everything that the woman owned, right? A father had a duty and a right to beat the child. And of course, we know now that some of these relationships and some of these roles and the duties that they entail are kind of poorly understood. And I think it's the same one here, to say that, we are the first class, foreigners second class, this is the tight nation state, this is the role, right? I think it's quite similar, in that sometimes the roles and duties are poorly understood. We don't have to be boxed into it.
You see, again, to clarify, right? I'm not saying, again, that, for example, the foreigners should be given a very low wage, or the foreigners should be for avoidance.
I'm not saying that you are. I'm contesting the idea that
I'm saying
that
for me, it's very. To me, I mean, really, of course, that's the beauty of the discussion. That is why I'm here today, and to also, and I think that it's very good that this discussion goes out, because it will refute, the typical PAP narrative that you all agree and all that. But then, anyway, putting this aside, I really am a very firm believer that the person in his own society should come first. And I want to point out that this is logically coherent in my model because I'm not anti-foreigner for the sake of being anti-foreigner or feel that foreigners should be second-class citizens in Singapore, but they can return to their own locality and there they should be first. So my point of view is that everyone should be a first-class citizen in his own locality, and everyone, the government of the area has the highest order duty towards people who are citizens.
Okay, but do you see where I'm coming from in that then gives power to the people who govern that locality, that identity, who have the power and influence over the definition of the nation, nationality. That then gives them the power to discriminate. If we do not establish this idea that all human beings should be treated on the basis of dignity and human rights, but instead we start down a path where we say it is okay to discriminate if you are of a certain citizenship or locality and other people aren't, well, then that's exactly why the PAP government tries to tar me as a traitor and foreign, right? Because then it can put me in this category of, he is not deserving of that citizenship. He is not deserving of the rights of that citizenship. Indeed, he is anti that citizenship and therefore a traitor, and therefore we have all the rights to discriminate against him. You see?
Let me clarify. You see, you see, the point is that, first of all, the point, I see where you're going, and my response is that we want to first of all, the idea of what is a nation's identity is in flux at any point in time. So my point is that it must not differ too much from, in my worldview, your concern would be adequately addressed because the PAP is trying to put forward its own variant, its own notion of what the Singaporean ideology is, but there is no consensus. I mean, there are very clear segment of people like my followers, which of course, if they are not that substantial, but overall it has been established that at least 40% categorically rejected the PAP, and they wouldn't accept that you and Kirsten are foreign influence. So we must draw the distinction between what I term wrongful labeling and labeling that is, for all intents and purposes, accurate, because it reflects.
But who gets to determine those labels?
The majority, which is itself in a state of flux.
Charles, I want to kind of get you. I think it's in the interest of fairness. I want to kind of give you the last word here. So, just sum up. I think
to sum up, PJ has raised many valid points. I agree with him. But I would address PJ's concerns by saying that, for example, anyone who has half a brain knows that PJ and Kirsten, using them as the two examples, are born and bred Singaporeans and are fully Singaporean in their ethos and their ideas, and they come in a long line of people that want to make Singapore a better society. So, I mean, really, we shall move on from this topic because it's a bit sian lah. But the idea is that, you see, at the end of the day, we look at PJ's motivation and under, even based on the test that I have, I've argued and all that, right? We must not conflate the PAP's critique of people like PJ and saying that he's a traitor with legitimate opposition towards foreigners, because in PJ's context, he satisfies the vast majority of the tests I've articulated for what is a Singaporean.
I have privilege. But if I were spoke with a different accent, had a different color skin, had a different religion, right? And if I just happened to have been born somewhere else and then came here at a young age, would I have, I could be exactly the same in terms of what I'm doing and saying, but I would be treated so differently. There has to be a certain. I know we agreed to give you the last word.
Last word, because you were in the middle of making a point there. You said that there's a distinction, so I want to let you finish that point before we move on.
Guys, just to finish this point, I may not be right, and to be honest, I just want to invite you, the viewer, keeping in mind, the Socratic dialogue or this kind of principles. You can consider the views of Sean and PJ, and you can also consider my views. And I hope that we you make the decision lah. Because to me, honestly, I will not belabor this point further, and I think that in the context of many other issues that we want to discuss, this is not the most important. It's not really the most important. The most important is really the lack of a lot of safeguards in Singapore, which also affects it affects the foreigners as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to have to sort of agree to disagree there. But I kind of want to get into something, that's going to be a little less contentious, and that's your theory of change. How do you think it's going to happen? How do you think it should happen? You mentioned earlier that you're kind of a determinist. You kind of think that that is a historical necessity, that we end up somewhere. And that's quite an orthodox Marxist point of view. Does your theory of change kind of follow that trajectory of thought as well?
It really does.
Okay.
My point of view is to articulate it simply. For those who do not know, I'm sure that the viewers of PJ's videos are generally quite educated people. So I will not explain what determinism means. But simply put, I believe that to go back to my analogy earlier, authoritarianism generally tends towards failure because the authoritarian may be either incompetent or he may act out of self-interest. Either or is quite likely. So in a situation that there is incompetence, the person below him will feel very angry. As they feel angry, and as they feel angrier, the one at the top will try to increase the grip. And as the person increases the grip, then the one below would react even more. In that sense, we see that a lot of tyrannical, regimes throughout history have never lasted for very long, and eventually they will fall.
Yeah.
So my theory of change is that it has to be catalyzed. Keyword is catalyzed by people who speak up, but would still occur in time, because we see that Singapore and I want to leave you guys with a quote from, ironically, Lee Kuan Yew, who founded Singapore, made Singapore in his image, as according to the PAP narrative. And do you guys know that Lee Kuan Yew said a number of times in interviews that Singapore is a historical aberration, and that many small states have not managed to survive more than he did not believe that Singapore would be around in 200 years. And you look at his demeanor, and you look at his interview, and you look at the things he said, and you see that he actually knows that it will be difficult for people who come after him to maintain that iron grip on Singapore. So we want to be objective here. You see, again, as I say, we are not here to engage in Lee bashing all the time, or to bash him incoherently. We have to give him some due credit for his achievements. And we have to point out that Lee, in fact, in a lot of his writings and teachings, was very well aware that it would be difficult. And to a certain extent, of course, he didn't use the word historical inevitability, but he knows that it is very difficult. I do not know if technology was one of the reasons why he said what he said. Like, he was aware that technology will make it harder for the PAP to control and for authoritarianism to be very viable. But I would submit that this is one of the factors which have to be considered as well, the technology change and all that. But minus this factor, if we look at the historical trend, usually the reason why a lot of all these authoritarian structures and hyper-capitalist structures will dissipate after some time is because they are too oppressive, and the people who are below start to fight amongst themselves and start to feel very pissed off, and the idea is that it is really not cutting a fair share of the pie, which B is also trying to touch on this topic. If you look at a lot of the points raised by the PAP in recent years, they are starting to try to position themselves as working towards a more equitable society. To answer your point, is really, my theory of change is that it has to be founded by these values, but the values that I've raised earlier, not allowing the top to make all the decisions, recognizing that the top may be trying to think for itself, may not be thinking in your bona fide best interest and all that, and then also recognizing that the top can only be adequately checked, and society can only adequately progress by a plurality of voices. And finally, to submit that the process of change, the theory of change, may occur and has been occurring organically. That is where I want to submit that if you look at but of course not fast enough lah, like you pointed out earlier. That's why I'm still quite cautiously pessimistic lah.
Okay.
I'm not deluded and think that this change will occur.
I want to put a little bit of pressure on this idea of inevitability or determinism, that things will naturally kind of turn out a certain way, right? The standard criticism of this is that it tends to take away agency or impetus from people or activists, right? Because if everything is just naturally going to fall apart, then why don't we just sit back, drink pina coladas, and watch the authoritarian state burn to the ground, right? So I kind of want to know how you square that with your own activism, because, you know, in a sense, you believe to somewhat, I guess, contradictory things. So on one hand, capitalism, authoritarianism, doomed to fail. But on the other hand, through your speeches, you show this never give up, never say die, give 120% kind of attitude. So how do you square the two of them?
The way I square the two of them is that we still need to do it because it is our responsibility, our moral responsibility, and it is how we are discharging our duty towards in a sense, I think of it as firstly a duty imposed on me based on my privilege, because I am conscious and aware, agree with what PJ has pointed out, that, you know, I would still fall squarely within, even based on my writings, you know, my discussion of the various tiers of hierarchy in Singapore and all that, I would still fall at the upper echelon of Singapore society lah. I'm quite honest, because I will not lie and say. But at the end of the day, I also want to say that I view it, at least for me, despite where I whatever has my background or whatever, I have done my best to try to make Singapore a fairer society. And I look at it as, it's also not purely altruistic, because I feel happy. I feel happy doing all this, so I would still do it, and it may not necessarily,
right?
it's just fulfilling.
Okay,
It's just think of it as a what I feel. It's a both morally an imperative to me, plus it's also fulfilling, because I mean, at the end of the day, I feel good, like when honestly speaking, I mean, it sounds weird lah, but like I feel good when I watch like a lot of content put out by Terry over the years, by yourself, and then I feel that even without the fundamental grounding that, you know, what the baby is doing is wrong, at the end of the day, I also enjoy this kind of discussion, and I feel that like no hard feelings, and I feel that I have learned and can ruminate about this. So in a way, I feel that it's quite good lah. Yeah.
Can I just follow up? You know, I'm on the record as agreeing with Lee Kuan Yew that Singapore is not necessarily sustainable on its own, and to his dying day, Lee was a proponent of reunification of Malaysia, which is one of the areas where I agree with him. And of course, ironically, people attack me for agreeing with him. The same people who attack me for disagreeing with him in other areas somehow attack me for agreeing with him in this one area. But the fundamental point is we need to constantly think about the arrangements that govern our lives, including this concept of the state and national, you know, state borders. And if this is not the best way to organize ourselves politically, then we need to take the long-term view and ask ourselves, well, for the benefit of all Singaporeans, how should we be organized? And one way is perhaps reunification of Malaysia, and another way might be a rethink of the borders of Southeast Asia as a whole to make them more consistent and coherent with how people on the ground lead their lives, and so on and so forth. But okay, so from that, right, you're not just an activist anymore, you're now chairman of a major, well-recognized political party in Singapore, right? Whether people agree or disagree with Reform Party, they know the Reform Party exists, and you are, you know, you have name recognition among Singaporeans at a very high level. You know, people know Charles Yeo now, and they know you're chairman of the Reform Party. So you have a platform and influence, and you have a party behind you. And so I guess the question is, what do you plan to do with that, in the sense of what is your vision for where Singapore should go, and how do you plan to achieve that?
Okay, first of all, I want to separate myself from the party because, of course, no one has the right to. We can only speak for the party based on, but through the method of reporting matters that the party CEC has agreed upon as set out in the party materials, and generally, and this is true for all parties in Singapore, honestly. In fact, even the SG, they will not usually, but putting that aside, I think there is a move towards opposition unity in Singapore in the last election because, largely speaking, the opposition is agreed on many topics, and more so, like, for example, minimum wage, which was a big topic that we discussed largely. The opposition is agreed that despite PAP fake news that the PSP does not agree with minimum wage, which the PSP later on clarified, it is broadly agreed that there should be a minimum wage in Singapore. However, the major political opposition parties are in disagreement about how much is the wage supposed to be. The Workers' Party is calling for $1,300, and the SDP has called for $1,750, and the Reform Party is calling for $1,900 to $2,000. So we are, at the end of the day, the link is that we want to I believe that for the greater good, we have to ensure that the PAP's narrative is challenged, and we really do not want to. We have to look at things in the context of the greater good, and we have to see that there is a move away from because if you look at the PAP's approach on the context of minimum wage, they don't even want to discuss a minimum wage, and they continue to attack the Workers' Party vociferously for calling for minimum wage. When, to me, $1,300 minimum wage is so clear as day that it better be implemented. So, when I look at all this, I feel that my role is really, first of all, I have to continue to put forward the message from first of all, my political party has to continue to do good and to volunteer and to help out the disadvantaged persons through rice distribution and distribution of necessities, as well as providing free tuition and pro bono legal advice, which I have been trying to do. And then we also need to continue to put forward the message of egalitarianism, and we should also really continue to speak up on national issues and try our best to handle the framework of oppression that is set out in that really all the political parties in Singapore, without exception, including the Workers' Party, has also faced like using the legal machination. I mean we can go on and on about that, but that would be beyond the scope of this video. Like, for example, the AHTC case, and then the use of the idea is that the PAP will deal using the law with a wide range of opposition. It could be nefarious or less. I mean, in that sense, it has been pointed out by that the targets are not constrained purely to opposition politicians, but also persons like Mr. Lee Hsien Yang, Lee Sheng Wu, even yourself. I mean, in the sense that they target you because nominally you are not a member of any political party. Am I right?
I'm not a member.
You're not. But you are also one of the frequent attacks on the state. And I'm right to say that, to my knowledge, Kirsten is also not a member of any political party.
She's not.
Neither
But
is
as far as I
Terry.
know.
Terry,
Yeah,
right?
no.
Yeah, but these. So the idea is that generally, if you do not even agree with the state, even if you are not a member, and I believe that on record you have never really posted much content to endorse any political party in particular, right?
My position is based on values and principles.
Yeah,
not,
correct,
you know,
correct.
If the PAP agreed with my values and principles,
Yeah.
I would support that platform.
Yeah.
I just want to kind of, sum up this big topic here, which is, your vision. Now, if you could just quickly kind of tell us, all right, what's one major structural systemic thing that you want to see changed in the next 15, 20 years? And one major cultural or ideological change that you'd like to see as well? What would they be?
The cultural and ideological point of view would be that I hope that Singaporeans can start thinking for themselves and stop thinking that the one on top has all the answers. I also would like to see a culture in Singapore where people start to glorify taking ownership and thinking out of the box and realizing that that is the only way to really progress. That is the answer.
Okay.
And I feel that we don't have to. I also want to create a culture of being able to consider, because for example the points that your good self and PJ have raised, I will go home and think about them, and I will of course I give them consideration, because and I, at the same time I hope that you guys will also consider whatever points of view, and at the end of the day we want to move towards a less we really, I believe that in the best interest of Singapore, in order to progress forward, there must be a culture of independent thinking. If not, the society a lot of the progress that is so-called occurred, right, is going to become harder and harder to replicate. And in fact, the cutting edge of Singaporean will be lost, which is not a point that only I have raised. In fact, the vast majority of the senior leadership of all opposition political parties in Singapore have raised this. Most recently, Hazel Phua of the PSP in a speech, because she talked about the low critical thinking ability of Singaporeans in her maiden NCMP speech. Yeah.
So does that then also inform your answer about the structural issue? Because it's not. It's very hard to say whether Singaporeans are able to think independently and critically, because even if we were, there are massive structural issues which prevent us from doing so. So I'm always very hesitant to say Singaporeans, to generalize in this blanket way, and negatively about Singaporeans. I think we can. For me, it's more about the structures and incentives that prevent us and severely discourage us from thinking independently. But I think we have the capacity to do so, right? But the problem is you can't prove it either way until you remove those structures and then see what happens. So is this also your answer to the structural question?
Yes, because a powerful, for example, I mean, again, it's not to really to flatter PJ or anything, but a powerful speech was given by PJ recently at the PSP's first the anniversary dinner, where he talked about the alternative. In the speech, PJ stated a point which I fully agree with, that and called upon all opposition parties in Singapore to state and to identify a coherent counter ideology to what the PAP has been proposing. And further, PJ stated that the party could not attract any sufficiently number of qualified persons or support generally if the party was not to articulate such a ideology lah.
Yeah. My argument was, until you articulate a coherent ideology, then people won't vote for you. They're just voting against the PAP.
Yeah. I agreed with the vast majority of what PJ said, which is definitely uncontroversial and in fact very important. But I also wanted to state for the record that it is important to know that without knowing what is right, we can know what is wrong, first of all, and how things have gone wrong. For example, we don't need to study deontological ethics or or even know what the Kantian categorical imperative is, or to really understand anything about ethics to know that to rape your own sister is wrong. You see, that's my point. My point is that, for example, a person that goes into he may not know how to cook, or may not know how to make a very good strawberry cheesecake, but I can know that the strawberry cheesecake that you make has really gone bad. This kind of thing. That's why I wanted to say that a vote against the PAP, based on the notion of democracy, is not an illegitimate vote prima facie. It's not a vote against the PAP. In fact, throughout the history of Singapore has been a substantial. And to share further, I just wanted to say that whilst the speech was really a very powerful speech by PJ, and I really shared it extensively among my friends, I also wanted to point out that even during the formative period of Lee Kuan Yew's time, right, the so-called socialist, democratic socialist ideology, which was often, like a lot of all the speeches that were put out in the campaign materials by Lee during that time, it was also not well articulated or very, very concrete in any way. But the vote for Lee's party, based on really Lee's own historical, narrative, like how he got the famous British barrister to argue in the Fajar case.
Okay. He didn't do that. Okay, that's a myth that Lee himself put out. He didn't arrange for Prit to come down. Right, that was arranged. You can read Dr. Po Sukai's book. Po Sukai was one of the defendants, right? But it wasn't Lee who arranged it.
But anyway, my point is that whether or not Dennis Prit was brought by Lee himself, my point of view is that Lee somehow managed to link himself to that, and at the end of the day, a vote for Lee should be understood less as a vote for Lee in that time, but more as a vote against colonialism. So,
I take the point.
We are trying to say that really, even without articulating a coherent ideology, I believe that the percentage of votes against the PAP would continue to increase. But however, it would be optimal to be able to articulate a coherent ideology in order to, in terms of the spectrum of diffusion, the innovation spectrum of innovation lah. If you want to get to critical majority, then do we need to be able, in order to really change the system, do we need to come forward, and that is where I was really motivated by the video. I think we will give more thought about this, and we need to implement research groups and working groups, and we need to get input from all stakeholders and not talk out of our own ass. And we also need to think about very concrete and nitty-gritty issues, which goes back to one of the points you raised, like municipal issues, okay? Because, like, for example, like for some issues, without the advantage of sufficient research, or which are what I term municipal versus national issues, we may need to do further research and be careful what we say in order to ensure that our credibility does not become low. That's what I'm trying to
I take the point, which is, let's not have double standards about the opposition must achieve X, Y, Z and more before we give them the vote, right?
Of course.
And I take as well PJ's point, which I think is like a very important reminder that really the opposition we can do better as an opposition. We can come up with a solid, coherent, ideological system, right? A finished package product, right? But anyway, that's the point. I want to kind of just wrap it up by throwing you a very last question, and that's a question I think for everybody out there that's interested in joining politics, or at least has ever thought of it, right? What are some pieces of advice that you can give to somebody who's thinking about joining politics, getting involved, or maybe even running as a candidate? I mean, you did it at a very young age.
My first point would really be, I believe something that PJ would agree with is really that even though PJ has never really been involved in politics, I would say that
I think what I do is very involved in politics. It's just not formal politics.
Correct, it's not
right?
formal politics, but at the end of the day, it is widely agreed that PJ is an individual that is greatly esteemed by the majority of opposition politicians who have even
we're talking about you.
Talking about me. My point is that I'm sure you will agree that you have to consider and think deeply, because the repression in Singapore is very real.
Right.
Even if you have low following, they may go after you and they may use the law against you, and you can
And I also want to urge you to because on a human level, I hope that you know what you sign up for, to be very honest. And I hope you can do some research about how they have persecuted people since the time of Dr. Po Sukai, Chia Tai Po, and all that. I mean, the list goes, or offhand now, I can state more than 25 to 30 people that have been persecuted in some way or another.
Yeah.
I mean,
And
we have a list of 2,500 people on the Function 8 website. So
yeah, and that is why he's a professional. I'm not. I mean, in the sense that I'm just someone that is trying. But at the end of
But
the
it takes all sorts, is your point, right?
Yeah.
It's not, you don't have to do it my way, you can do it your way,
Yeah.
you can do it Sean's way. So we're just curious about,
Yeah,
your
Function
advice.
8 website. It's just to speak very briefly. I mean, related to this point, the Function 8 website is a very powerful illustration of how there have been so many people that are persecuted throughout the history. And of course, for the majority of them, the supporters of the establishment would say that the persecution was non-brutal in nature, and it was something similar to Tang's or Gopala Nayar's kind of persecution, or whereby the person was forced abroad. But putting aside that, there's a lot of mental stress and all that generally. So my point is that usually the people who dare to do all this, they really love the nation. If not, they are not going to do all this. Because you must think like, what is it in them? And the truth is that the majority of them did not obtain a single cent, and in fact lost a hell lot of money out of doing all this and suffered a lot of financial deprivation. You see, because I say financial because I don't want to be smart and say it, because physical hardship was only really borne by lesser number of people, and also during the period of time until there is no very difficult. It's difficult to document brutality by the state against opposition politicians.
Well, I mean, actually, no, it's well established that they were tortured, and in ways that meet the Geneva Convention.
Yes.
That's
But
not
my point
controversial.
was that not from. It's like from the 1990s onwards, no opposition politicians were detained so far.
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah.
They
Okay, but
stopped
that's
using-
sort of the
Okay,
point
yeah.
one, right?
Yes,
that
point
like
one, yeah.
So
it is tough. It is
it's
mentally
tough,
training.
It's tough. So
Be
point-
mentally prepared
point
for
two,
that.
It would be
Yeah.
point two would be that I hope you should also think about the party that you join and reference PJ's really the point that was raised earlier, which is that think about what the party means to you and what you can contribute to the party. In that sense, joining a party is not different at all from getting a training contract or joining a company. You must think first, like, what are you able to contribute to the party, and what are your skill sets, and be ready to serve the party. And don't think that you join for benefits like free legal advice from the or ask for benefits, or to join for politicking by nature. Because at the end of the day, what will you get from the whole thing is that when you walk around, people will recognize you, but actually it's nothing much, because you may also. My point is that try to make some positive difference, and do not be afraid to put forward your ideas, and try to stay positive about the whole thing, and know that you are doing something good, in the sense of like filling up a well, in the sense you are really, it will take very long, but I feel that you are doing something good. So I want to encourage all of you, and I think it's very good that you may want to consider volunteering, or even if you are afraid to come forward as a formal member of the party, I think you can start by engaging more with members of the party, and not necessarily being a card-carrying member first of all, but try to do some humanitarian work under the party's auspices. And in fact, that goes to me. The final point I want to conclude is that I'm not a rabid anti-PAP basher all the time, because there is a lot of good work done by people who are part of the PAP, but they may be ignorant or uninformed, and the wrong agenda of the PAP, or the very elitist and hard and cruel agenda of the PAP, does not necessarily make all members of the PAP aware the same way. And so you can start by just joining the political party and understanding the inner workings of the party, and then if you don't like it, you just move on, and then you may and really try to experiment and understand and take a conscious interest in the politics of Singapore society, because really that is the nation that we are growing up in and that we are living in, and we all have a responsibility towards the civic duties, you know, like we really have a responsibility to take part in shaping our own society, and if not then don't complain that the society is not what you see. That's the final point I wanted to end off, because I really think this is the last thing I would say lah. I really felt very sad whenever a lot of people complain, but then they felt fearful they would complain about how they got no job, or how they're marginalized by foreigners, and then they complain about how they cannot speak up and then all that, but then they don't want to do anything concrete to really come forward and try. So in that sense, sometimes I really have to echo the views of my SG, that where he said that Singaporeans get the government that they deserve. And that is why I tell you, at the end of the day, you guys may laugh, but I really enjoyed being in the Reform Party despite all the things that happened, because I generally really agree with a lot of the views of the SG, like what he says and what he does, and I hope that you guys can similarly find such a political party and work your way up. That's all.
Yeah. Can I ask just on that last point, right? When you ran for the chairmanship, and this was an internal democratic vote, I'm assuming, what did you say to the rest of your party when you put yourself forward as a candidate? What was your campaign platform?
My campaign platform is that I mean the reform, but there was only based on the main thing I said was that, you know, I will really do my best to uphold the legacy of JBJ, and I believe that we have to return to the roots of the teachings of JBJ, which is set out in JBJ's writings, parliamentary speeches during Hansard, and also the works that he written, the works that he composed during, I mean the works that he wrote, like The Hatchet Man, and then Make It Right for Singapore. And we really need to understand what were the beliefs of the founder, and how we can, apart from what were the beliefs of the founder, the other 2 points would be, what can we further add of value to the beliefs of the founder, and also the third and final point was that how will we be able to interpret or make the founder's teachings relevant to the present day, because that is a struggle that is faced by the PAP as well. I mean, like just in a post last night, I pointed out that, for example, the issue of who should be able to interpret Lee Kuan Yew's legacy is contested between, Lee Hsien Loong and Dr. Lee Wei Ling, as well as Lee Hsien Yang. I mean, they have been a bone of the contention. Of course, it's not just the Oxley Road House, but they have all issued a lot of public statements that goes to the root of who is the one with the right to interpret the father's ideology. But do you agree? I mean, that they
there's definitely a disagreement. I'd like to think that professional historians also have a role in interpreting his legacy.
Whatever he ever said during his lifetime. And
I think that the disagreement between those two sides are more about who's the guardian of that legacy, right?
Correct. Yeah. So that's pretty much it, and it was really a great pleasure to be here today.
All right. Okay, thank you so much for coming on, Charles. May not agree on everything, but that was definitely insightful, and I think sound advice as well for anybody looking to get into the field of politics, running as a candidate. I think that was a fun session.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, thank you so much, Charles. It is, it's always difficult to put yourself out there and to let yourself be challenged on your views, and so I have a lot of respect for you that you're willing to come and really have a very frank and robust discussion about those views. And at the end of the day, we can disagree, but I think we all agree that this sort of discussion is really important for the political process in Singapore. For any political process, right, you need to be able to speak freely and argue and debate. And I'm really glad that you're willing to come here, and I hope that more politicians will come. I'll definitely invite more politicians from all the parties to come here, and hopefully they will follow your example and be willing to come and debate over their views. So I want to thank you for your activism, for your courage. It's not easy doing what you do. Definitely there's a lot of opprobrium, there's a lot of attacks, even mockery, right? But the fact is, you are trying to make a difference for Singapore in ways that you really believe in, and that is definitely something that has to be very respected, and which is something everyone should be doing. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
So, and always thank you, Sean, for co-hosting. Excellent questions as always.
Thanks so much for having me
The whole
on.
philosophical angle, I thought, was great.
Yeah, I mean, it was a real delight. It was a real pleasure because, on the social media front, on the Wake Up Singapore front, right? I mean, Charles is doing some very interesting things, right?
Yeah.
Live streams, things like that,
Yeah.
using and leveraging Instagram. So, I mean, I'm really glad I got to meet like the man, the myth, the legend, the social media expert who has sort of captured our attention. So, I mean, yeah, it's been very insightful, right? A very polemic character, and I'm really glad that this happened.
Okay. All the best to you, Charles. And thank you to all of you for tuning in. As always, do check out other stories from Southeast Asia on newnarrative.com. Check out our sister podcast, Southeast Asia Dispatches, for more news, interviews, and commentary from around Southeast Asia. And if you enjoyed this and would love to see us do more of this, we really do need your support. So please do support New Narrative, newnarrative.com/join, or donate at newnarrative.com/donate. So thank you very much, everyone. See you next time.